So, guys, I want to do a tough video, tough stories, and I do talk about issues of that I've faced in my life, such as like domestic violence and emotional abuse and bullying and other things that I've been through. But part of it is also that I do want to talk about like some things I do struggle with. Like, there's this guy named Jay Williams who has a YouTube channel, and he does talk about serving 10 years in prison, and that kind of inspired this. And then also, too, there's this guy, Dem Drops, and he talks about some things that are going on with him with his health, really. And I think that sometimes I want to talk about some of my weaknesses. And one of the weaknesses that I've had was, a bit of sex addiction in my life. And I definitely want to do a more detailed video about that. But I definitely, want to talk about like the phone sex incident that happened to me in high school. That what happened was that I had a girlfriend in high school and we would have phone sex with each other for a couple of years. And it started this way that I would kind of like would ask her, if she would like to do this or that on the phone, and she consented, really. And it was always something where she would say yes to everything, really. That was really her personality. And then there was no mental health issues, and then there was no like force or whatever. It's like, you know what? It's just the same thing as sitting in bed with your wife and saying, "Hey, do you want to have sex tonight?" Okay, we're going to do that. It was always a consensual thing, really. But, long story short, was that there was one day when I was in high school, like this was going on for like 4 years. And there was one day in high school where her mom was like listening on the conversation, really. And because because when you call somebody on the phone on a landline, other people can pick up and listen to what's going on, really. So she kind of found out that way. And so she sent an email to my dad and called my dad and said something like I was forcing her against her will to do phone sex. So I remember like my dad, flipping out on me. And there's a lot to unpack here. That I think that when I think about like sex, like we always have to have a bunch of conversations, especially with our boys, about sex. And one of the conversation is why you don't have sex at a young age. And one of the big reasons why you don't have sex at a young age is because there's a lot of rape liars out there. Or there's a lot of times where you do phone sex and it's consensual, but then you have other people saying, "Oh, well, I don't like my daughter's engaging that," or "I don't like that my daughter had sex with this boy, so I'm going to lie and try to get them on trouble." Or if a daughter ends up pregnant, there are many people that are like, "Hey, you know what? I don't like that my daughter's pregnant, so I'm going to say that that's a child of rape." Because I want to just not accept my daughter as a sexual being. I just want to say that had to happen by rape, and she's still pure. And because of that, there are people who still have that, and unfortunately, my ex-girlfriend's mother was like that, really. So this is why we have these conversations with our children. It's not birds and the bees. It's sexual self-control is one of the big things. But that's also one of the reasons why I want to do these videos, is to say, hey, to any teenager, to anybody's watching, this is why you got to sexual self-control. This is why you got to teach your children this is why teenagers should not have sex or do anything sexual, is because you don't know how the other person's parents could respond, or sometimes you may have sex with somebody and then they're like, it was rape because I just I wasn't okay because I just felt uncomfortable afterwards. Like they say sometimes when people have sex, they feel a little used, especially when people first started having sex for the first time. They may feel a little used because it's a new experience for them. Sometimes when you have sex, like a lot of times in your life, then you get to a pattern of, okay, you know what? You don't think about it afterwards. It happened and then you move on. But that's one of the reasons why we have to talk to our children about sex is that sometimes there are people who lie about rape when that never happened to get out of trouble, or if they have parents that want to press charges, they'll go along with the parents. Or there is a situation sometimes where the parents don't like that it was consensual. They didn't want it to happen, so they're gonna lie about consent, really, and that's what happened, really. But I also remember at that time, my dad flipped out on me, and he's like saying things like, you know, you should be talking about like school and high school, not about your fucking coming and whatever, and he was saying like coming, and my dad would like, and I know I did a video about this before, that when I took a very long shower. My dad was like, he expected me to say something like, "Oh, well, I was masturbating," or I remember like another time I got accused by a teacher of grabbing my crotch and doing like a gang gesture to her. So my dad was grabbing his crotch and doing a gang gesture, like imitating like what he thought that I did really. So there is a line with parenting. Like when you talk about your kid's semen and sperm or fucking or whatever, that's bad. Or when you do like, oh well, you gestured to your crotch, so I'm gonna gesture to my crotch as an adult. That's crossing a line really. And I also remember like one time I had a girlfriend and like it was around the time that my grandmother died, and my dad was saying things like, you pay money to go on a train to see your girlfriend for sex, to fuck her, to have her taste your cum and other things like that, but you won't go see your grandmother in hospice really. You care about your coming and whatever. Like like when a parent says that to you, I know they're trying to make a point, that maybe trying to be like, okay, I'm going to be a little bit gritty with this, but that's not never okay really, because that's a sign of disrespect really. Because you know hard story, I remember like, sometimes my parents would kiss each other on the lips, or sometimes they would hug each other and be moaning. Like, imagine you're at the dinner, imagine you're having a breakfast and you're seeing your two fathers like hug each other and moan a little bit and thrust their crotches really. Like imagine if I was imitating that, or I was saying, hey, this happened to me this morning, or hey, can you guys stop doing this, I know you guys are gay and that's what gay, like there's a stereotype that gay people can't control themselves sexually. Imagine if I said that, or I was talking to my grandmother and I was imitating that, or I went to school, I was imitating that, or I was imitating that, just to embarrass my parents really. You know, there are things that we should never say to people. There's a certain level of respect, but when you start talking about somebody's, sex life or what they're doing sexually, especially if it's even a parent trying to humiliate their kids, really, there's a line of, well, you are just being disrespectful, really, and I understand some parents use humiliation as a punishment, but that's not always the best thing, really. But that was kind of what my dad was doing, And I remember like my dad saying some hurtful things to me, like no matter where you go in life, you're always gonna have a brain of like a 7-year-old or whatever, really, and your girlfriend has like a brain of like a 5-year-old or whatever. But I also remember like that was also when I was going through a lot of emotional abuse and stuff like that, and that was really kind of the end of it, because really his message went over my head really. I remember actually being so upset by my dad just verbally abusing, emotionally abusing, embarrassed me that I broke up with my girlfriend. And the way that I did with that was I just stopped communicating with her, and that was that really, because I felt like, really just hurt by what my father said to me. And the message did get lost. But I do feel, I do feel a couple of things. I do feel that, as a parent, I would say, hey, this is why we gotta have self-control over this, and hey, you know what, it's a really heavy shit when somebody is saying, oh well, when a parent is saying something like, oh well, they want to press charges, or they want to say it was non-consensual, or you're coercing, or whatever really. And also too, this is also kind of why, like there was a lot of phone sex with me and my girlfriend. There were times at her house there was consent to there was consent to like sexual acts and stuff like that really. But yeah, because her parents would do things like leave us alone for a couple of hours and other things like that. So there's a lot of times where you have parents who are not that responsible, and when something happens like sex, and they may have some old school values like a girl's purity, they're not going to take responsibility to say, hey, I left two kids home alone, and teenagers are horny, and if my daughter says yes, yes, I'm okay with this, and this happens, it means she's a participating partner. So sometimes, when we talk to our kids and we talk to them about sex, this is why we have to say, hey, this is why you don't have sex at young ages, or hey, this is why, we don't have secret relationships, or this is why you guys don't do a lot of phone conversations or whatever when we're not home, because things like this do happen really. And other things like that. But I would also say, hey, you know what? We all have sexual energy, and there's people like me who have a very high sexual energy. So even at that time, I had to learn, it's awesome to have a girlfriend. It's awesome to have a girlfriend that that in high school we were doing phone sex. It's awesome to have a girlfriend that was comfortable with doing some sexual acts and stuff like that, and also was a willing participant to a lot of just to a lot of just sexual stuff. Really, I was very lucky to have that. But on one spot, on the other side, this is why we got to teach our kids to have control of their sexual energy, because one of the big problems that happen is that kids don't realize, hey, you know what, even though even though I have sexual energy, I gotta learn how to control it. So sometimes when there's things I want to do, I shouldn't be doing them and other things like that, because sometimes things don't work out, or sometimes it puts us in a bad situation. Like, I remember when I was in college, I did online dating. So there were two women that I had sex with. But I remember the third woman that I wanted to have sex with. She was a welfare mom. She was like saying something like, "I get this much money off my kid," and then she was also saying something like, "Oh well, a couple of my baby daddies are in jail, really." But I remember going down to Burlington, Vermont, and really thinking about meeting her, and I chose not to do that because I felt a very strong intuition not to do that. And I remember going to therapy at that time because I was very, very naive. And my therapist told me, like, it's glad that I didn't do that, but I was very naive and I was easily taken advantage of. But but this is why we teach people to have sexual self-control. Because imagine if I had sex with that girl, it would have been the first time I'd done without a condom, and then I had a kid, and and then like, oh well, then I gotta like pay for a kid, and then she made me like, oh well, hey judge, it's not just this kid, he should be paying for other kids as well, because that happens a lot when people when people have to pay child support. Sometimes judges may be like, okay, you know what, even though you had one kid with this girl, she has three other kids, so you should pay a little to the other ones as well, really, when that's not how it should go, really. But when you have sexual energy, this is 100% the reason why, you gotta learn how to self-control. And when we have kids, we gotta teach them that. We gotta say, hey, you know what? If you don't have sexual self-control, you can get into prostitution. If you don't have sexual self-control, you can be dating women that have parents that may lie about consent. Women may lie about consent. Or other, genders will lie about consent because they don't, just because they're just not happy after it happens when it's consensual. Or sometimes, like, I remember, like, I had sex with one girl and she grabbed it and she put it inside her without a condom. And sometimes you may meet people who are like that as well, really, where they may think that that's kinky or cute, but then you're like, hey, we got to wrap it up, really. Like, I met like a couple of girls who like to do it without a condom, really, and that's never a safe thing, really. But but yeah, but that's always very, very important, that we learn to have self-control, and we teach our kids self-control. But also too, that for this video, and I think for another video that I'll do a follow-up on, is that sexual energy, like, some people have very higher sexual energy than other people. It runs in my family. Like, my biological parents have that. But we always have to be like, hey, you know what? We just don't have sex. We don't do anything sexual as kids. And I was like, I was like 17 and she was 16. Then we were 18 and 17 at the time, really. But the thing is, this is why we don't do those things. And then also too, when you're having phone sex, what you are like, everybody, the whole family's using your phone. So like, if you're doing this, and stuff like that, it's still like kind of like not cool, because it's almost like you have other relatives using that. So, that's is what it is, really. But sometimes when our parents overreact and say hurtful and heartbreaking things, sometimes the point gets lost, really. But I think that, and then also too, sometimes it's hard because we have parents who want us to take things really seriously. So sometimes it may be using aggressive language and other things like that to kind of get the point across, when that may be more hurtful and stuff like that. But But yeah, that's all I gotta say really. I just think that we gotta be in control of our sexual energies. We also just have to understand that there's just things that there's a reason why they say that's just that like sex is usually good when you're in college and you get to know somebody for a while. Really, it's not good in high school and to do it as a fling really, or to even do phone sex. There was a story in my high school of this kid who cut a run home, who ran cross country. I mentioned this story before. He ran cross country. He cut a run. He cut a run to go to his girlfriend's house and have sex when she was home alone, and he was bragging about it to everybody on the track team. And my dad got him kicked off the track team because I got kicked off for bad behavior, and then he did this, and the coach did nothing really. But it did create an issue in our town because in Guilford everybody talks really, but it did create an issue as well because the mom found out that, and then she kind of found out that her daughter's being talked about as the local slut. Then she kind of was saying maybe it wasn't consensual because some parents will do that because they don't want their daughter to be known as the local whore. So they're gonna like lie about they're gonna lie on their kid. And they're gonna teach their kid, hey, you know what, whatever your reputation is hurt, you got to hurt the man's reputation by saying that you were raped when that shouldn't be happening, really. So, have sexual self-control. Sex is never appropriate for anybody in high school, really. You have to, like, be out of high school. Like, usually in your 20s, that's the best time, really, because then that way you have time to really think about it, get to know a person. Or you may be dating people or do, like, online dating or, like, sex on the first date or phone sex on the first date. And then you get to know somebody, and then you may deal with more mature people. Sometimes you don't really, but phone sex is never appropriate for when you're in high school, and I learned that the hard way. But it was fun, though.